Thank you all so much for joining day 2 of our Securing the American Dream for Working Families conference. Yesterday, my friend and colleague, Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman, hosted a fantastic discussion on the future of work, going over what a federal jobs guarantee could look like, the importance of green jobs we can create by passing the Green New Deal, and the importance of unions moving forward. Today, I'm excited to join experts to discuss our wealth and how we can build a future that will benefit all Americans, not just those at the top. As we face an extended recession and increased job losses due to the COVID-19 public health crisis, we must remember that the wealthiest among us left the Great Recession with even more wealth than they started with, while people of color lost disproportionate amounts of their wealth. People of color in this country cannot continually face economic crises that only serve to exacerbate the racial wealth gap. COVID-19 exposed the significance of economic and racial gender inequities that many in this country have ignored. Our minimum wage workers, overwhelmingly women and people of color, continue to go to work in person every day to keep our society functioning, exposing themselves and their loved ones to this terrible coronavirus. Meanwhile, Wall Street works from home, and the wealthiest among us just keep hoarding more and more wealth. And millions of Americans took a $2,400 monthly pay cut because of Republican stonewalling in the Senate. We need my friend, Senator Warren's, and Representative Ro Khanna's Essential Workers Bill of Rights to give our essential workers hazard pay and PPE. We need to pass a $15 minimum wage so workers aren't trying to build wealth while struggling with an outdated, decade-old income. We need Medicare for all so nobody gets crushed under the cost of healthcare or loses their coverage when they lose their job. We need to address the student loans crisis and the ever-rising price of college so a lack of wealth doesn't block one of the best paths for increasing lifetime earnings. We need to uphold our federal trust responsibility and finally give tribal nations the funding our country promised decades ago. I'm working on legislation with Senator Warren to ensure that we honor those promises. And as we continue to reckon with our country's racism, we must pass H.R. 40 to study and develop plans to address the mass looting of wealth we committed against Black people in America for centuries. Wealth disparities on a scale not seen since the Great Depression are a disappointing policy failure, and we must address it and uplift all people so we have the same opportunities and abilities to pursue the American dream. And so I'm happy now to turn this panel over to our phenomenal organizer, Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman, for a brief statement.
Thank you very much, Deb. You have already exceeded our expectations on what's going to be a very rich discussion. This is an important part of the second day of what is going to be the 3-day economic conference that we've been able to convene, Securing the American Dream for Workers' Families, and the notion and the issue of access to wealth, whether it's from baby bonds to guaranteed income or to any of the other issues that you raised in your preamble, are going to be a part of a rich discussion. I think that the one thing that is so exciting to me is that we're going to have this discussion about reaching out and presenting options, presenting programs and proposals and legislation that will ensure that no family is yoked by poverty in this country. It is not a hard thing to do. We simply have to have the will to do it. I want to thank the panelists who are going to participate in this discussion, and particularly thank you to Mayor Ras Baraka of the city of Newark, who is going to be our amazing moderator today. Have a great discussion, and I know out of this discussion will come even more things, more issues, and more opportunities to provide a greater opportunity for our working families.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bonnie. And now I'm thrilled to introduce our moderator for today's panel, Ras Baraka. Baraka has the honor to be the 40th mayor of Newark, where he has helped address affordability for working families while continuing to lower unemployment and grow the economy. Mayor Baraka fights every day to implement progressive policies while pioneering new solutions to decades-old problems. Before Congress passed a single one-time payment to families during this crisis, Mayor Baraka had already started considering guaranteed income as a means to help his community. He is one of the founding mayors of Mayors for a Guaranteed Income and is currently trying to launch a pilot guaranteed income program in Newark. Mayor Baraka, thank you so much, and the panel is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I just want to first thank Congresswoman Haaland for those insightful and very poignant remarks in the beginning. Very clear, kind of gave us our marching orders in the discussion, ladies, in terms of where we have to get higher than that. And I want to thank my Congresswoman here from New Jersey, Bonnie Watson Coleman, who's always, on point when trying to make sure that there's equity, representation, and justice for working families across the state of New Jersey and across this country. And thank you for inviting me to moderate this panel, Securing the American Dream for Working Families. We have two incredible panelists with us today. The first one is Anna Aurilio from the National Campaign Director at the Economic Security Project. Economic Security Project has been all over the nation trying to help us with this guaranteed income. And I'm proud to be one of the founding members with Mayor Tubbs, who really spearheaded all of this for us on this guaranteed income project. The other one is Vanessa Roanhorse, founder of Roanhorse Consulting, who's also joining us in this conversation on what the American dream or securing the American dream for working families here. First, I want to talk about this idea of universal basic income. We could jump right into what does universal basic income mean would be very, very, very important because I know people are not clear on exactly what that is. Anna, you could please help us out there.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mayor Baraka. And I'm so honored to be on a panel with Congresswoman Haaland and Vanessa Roanhorse. And also thanks so much for Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. Anna Aurilio, I'm the Federal Campaign Director for the Economic Security Project. And we work to challenge the status quo and build economic power for all Americans. So we're really thrilled to be working with Mayor Baraka and other mayors around the country on guaranteed income. The bottom line is right now we're living in uncertain times, and we've seen an even greater widening of economic disparity as a result of the pandemic. People's struggles are compounded by uncertainty and stress, and we need a policy solution that is bold, innovative, ambitious, and stunningly simple. The bottom line is if people don't have enough money, the solution is to give them money. A guaranteed income is a monthly cash payment given directly to individuals. It's unconditional, no strings attached, and no work requirements. A guaranteed basic income says no matter who you are, you have worth and you deserve life's basic necessities.
I know there are a lot of people that are trying to push back on that. They push back on me here in Newark, even though 78% of our households rent and 30% of those households pay 50% of their income on rent. In fact, and about a quarter of our population, a third, of our population lives in poverty. What do you say to people who say, just before we move on, who say that this is a way to get people not to participate in the economy, not to work, but to stay home and do nothing?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research that actually turns this right on its head. And basically, it's not true. Many of the people who are in the guaranteed income programs, for example, in Stockton, California, not only are working, but are working 2 and 3 jobs. Stockton has the longest running guaranteed income program right now, and less than 2% of the people in that program are actually unemployed. The rest of the people, again, are working 2 and 3 jobs. And in fact, we've seen some real results. I think another argument I've heard back is, well, how will people spend the money? In Stockton, people spend 40% of the money on food. They spend it on other necessities. And then one important income that I think is harder to measure is people's quality of life increase. We heard from a father who was able to not take the third shift so that he could help his kids with homework. We heard from a mom who was getting better sleep at night because otherwise she was staying awake wondering how she was going to pay her bills. So it's not true that it discourages work, and it is true that it helps people meet their basic needs.
Awesome. That jumps us right into, I know, the legislation that the Congresswoman Watson Coleman has sponsored. The legislation that guaranteed income pilot program, which is exactly what we're doing, but she's on a national level. And I'd like to talk about that in a minute and exactly what that means, what actually the legislation points out for us. Congresswoman Haaland, can you elaborate on that for us?
Thank you so much. Somebody's out there mowing the lawn, so I'm going to stay on mute when I don't have to. Look, Congress, first of all, what I want to say is if people are making more money with the stimulus checks and the unemployment now during the pandemic, they weren't getting paid enough. They were not getting paid enough at their regular job. So that tells us something, right? It's why we're fighting for a higher minimum wage and all the other things that we're fighting for. Basically, Congress implemented somewhat of a trial version of universal basic income when we passed the CARES Act. Americans got up to $1,200 each. It wasn't enough. We want them to have more, and that's why we passed the HEROES Act. And for Americans who actually received their stimulus check, yes, as has been said, they didn't waste the money. They spent it on food and rent and utilities and things like that. The stimulus checks worked, but the next COVID-19 relief package must build upon those first payments to do better. And the more time we waste in not getting that legislation on the floor of the Senate because it is languishing over on the Senate side, the more and more people are going to fall behind. I don't want anyone to lose their houses. I don't want anyone to go hungry in this country. There's no reason for that. And so yes, we've written many letters. We have worked hard to make sure we're moving these things forward. And we've seen that since the CARES Act, that Congress won't pass a bill every month to keep working families afloat. So all aid provided in the next package must be recurring, right? We're not going to recurring so that it just happens regularly until we're out of this terrible recession. No bill we pass during this economic crisis will be wealth gap neutral. It will either help us lessen the wealth gap or make it even more devastating for families in our communities. And that's the way I see it.
And that rolls us right to you, Vanessa. Just how do you think that what does it mean for working people, guaranteed income, and what the Congresswoman talked about, the steady payments from the CARES Act?
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you so much to the opportunity to speak at this panel. I mean, just the fact that so many of our communities have been hit so hard, I think COVID has just laid the deep inequities that many populations across the United States are facing. I'm Navajo from the Navajo Nation. The lack of quality access to jobs, living wage, infrastructure, and public health has just been compounded. And so the ability to have regular income coming in, it's really about what I think is setting the stage for this new economic framework that's really designed with resiliency in mind. When we think about why we're in this situation and why we became so vulnerable to something like COVID, but also thinking about the history of how wealth has been created in this country, we have to recognize that the market that we built this concept of wealth creation on actually hasn't represented the regular American in a very long time. Rather, we need to start to separate this concept of market drivers and really think about what is prosperity for all. And I think having universal basic income, guaranteed income, is a perfect example of what it means for us to be doubling down on people where they are and who they are, It's an opportunity for folks to get in front of, for the first time, maybe even putting in a small savings. We know most families are, at about $500, if something happened, would put them into an incredibly precarious and dangerous situation. Having this type of income that supports them allows them to make better decisions for themselves, their families, to consider what access to healthcare, childcare could look like, opportunities to ensure that they have transportation. So for those who still have jobs and or companies that are moving and running, we need to make sure those people continue to employ and have operating opportunities, because it's bigger than just COVID. It's the fact that we have had stagnant wages. And at the workplace, the benefits don't exist for many of our communities, and we don't have savings. So universal basic income really is about starting to build some of that institutional foundation for families to be in the decision and driver's seat.
Right. I like the concept. You said we should stop, not just be focusing on market, but also but begin focusing on people, people prosperity, which talks directly about the wealth gap that exists in this country. In 2016, the last year for which this data was available, the median Black wealth was about 17,000. White households was at 170,000. But if you come to my state, New Jersey, it gets really, really stark and ugly. White families' median income was about $352,000, and the median net worth for Black and Brown families were about $6,100 and $7,300, respectively. That is completely absurd, and it would probably take hundreds of years to fill a wealth gap that big. That level of inequity actually explains why we have the issues that we have. Now, I just want to stay with you for a minute and just talk to us clearly about what the wealth gap really means. When people say wealth gap, what does that really mean in layman's terms?
Sure thing. So I think we have to make sure we know the difference between income gap versus wealth gap. Yeah. While they're related, they're also not the same. And I think sometimes we get stuck on income inequality, while very important, isn't really the long-term, I think, cliff that we're heading towards, right? Something in like within 20 years, if we don't address this wealth gap issue, particularly the racial wealth gap issue, Black families will have zero wealth. I mean, that is the acceleration that we're moving towards. So like when you think about the income gap, it really refers to the gap in earnings between two different groups, such as the 1% or the 99%, or those who are operating, at the spectrums of income inequality. And then on the wealth gap, it's really about assets and net worth. And assets are those that the net worth meets assets minus debts. And those are looking at something bigger and larger beyond just income. And for me, when I think about why wealth matters so much, is that not only are many of us unable to have savings or access to, many of us aren't able to purchase our house. Our education debt is so significant that we're unable to actually utilize that to build credit, to think about purchasing and or investing. Many of us don't even operate working in the stock markets or the markets because we're unable even to access that. And the idea around wealth is that within all these assets, you have multiple layers of a safety net. You have multiple layers in which you can make better decisions. Wealth gap also is indicators of the lack of decisions you have, or the ability to make decisions, like the type of job, where you live, ability to have access to healthy foods, the ability to be more safe in specific neighborhoods. All of that are parts of the decision-making of how wealth continues to be compounded. And, thinking a lot about what has happened with COVID, we're seeing how lack of safety there really is for our people in our community. And that if we are not thinking about bigger and broader terms around addressing the wealth gap, we are not thinking as bold and as innovative and honestly willing to take the risk, which is investing in our families.
Absolutely. There are a few pieces of legislation that I think the Congress is working on to kind of address some of these things. And early on, I heard Congresswoman Watson Coleman try to address some of these, the baby bonds, funding for minority serving institutions, all these kinds of things that are happening. Congresswoman Haaland, what does the Congress have in store, and what do you think about these pieces of legislation?
Thank you, Vanessa, for your insight. And as Vanessa was talking, I was thinking about my own situation. There's a Section 184 loan that Native Americans can apply to buy their first home. But in order to access that loan, and I tried several times, you can't have any late payments for an entire year. When you have rent, utilities, student loans, bill after bill after bill, and you were not making enough money, you're going to be late. There's no way to not have any late payments for an entire year. So I feel like some of the regulations on the programs that would help people to own a home and to do, to get ahead, so to speak, it's still stacked against you. So there's a lot of reform I think we need to do to make sure that people can actually take advantage of the programs that Congress has already put into place. No single policy created the wealth gap, and no single policy will eliminate it. It's absolutely systemic. And I feel like from my own experience, I can probably have a little insight into how some of these, some of the tools that we should be moving forward can help people. And we think about access to quality schools and higher education increases lifetime earnings. It can help address the wealth gap, but even then, white college graduates have on average 3 times the wealth as their Black colleagues. So when I think about assets, as Vanessa was talking, it's home ownership. More people need to be able to buy a home. And despite the importance of the Fair Housing Act, Black home ownership in 2019 was the same as it was before the passage of that historic legislation. So why is that? We need to dig into these things and remedy the situation so that folks have those opportunities. Decades of redlining still echoes in neighborhoods throughout the country. Those are things we absolutely need to watch out for. And these differences accumulate over someone's lifetime. Easier access to higher education with lower student debt, a head start on home ownership, all of these things add up. So Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Jimmy Gomez introduced the 99.8% Act to establish a progressive estate tax that affects only the wealthiest top 0.2% of Americans and makes them pay their fair share. The wealth that this bill would impact will still be able to launch their children far ahead of the rest of us, but it would put just a small limit on how far ahead their children would get. And I would have to say also that we need to stop giving the richest people in the country tax breaks.
Yeah.
We can't ever say that too much.
Right.
Other people deserve to have wealth in this country, not just the top 1%.
Right. And New Jersey, we're having a difficult time trying to pass the millionaire's tax here in New Jersey, even with all of the fundamental budget issues that we have around education, around homelessness and healthcare, around a pension. It's difficult for us to even get and this is a Democratic state, so I know how incredibly difficult it must be in the Congress to get some of this stuff passed. Just this idea that the most wealthy are still making money in the middle of this crisis to the extent that where they're making it, and that working people and poor people are making less money. That by itself is just a stark kind of reality that just needs to be addressed clearly and pointedly. So I'm glad that folks are doing it, and just the idea of what working people are going through in this particular time, this wealth gap. So if we actually close the wealth gap, I was actually on a panel yesterday talking about the census and how if we just counted people correctly and right, we might get a little bit more money to ease some of the pain that we have to deal with because of the wealth gap and inequity. And they asked me a question that I'm going to ask you, ask you, Anna, just like, what do you think if the wealth gap was closed, how would that help working families in this country, or working people?
Well, you know, before we had this health crisis, we had a human-made crisis, right? So 40% of Americans couldn't meet a $400 emergency expense without without selling something or borrowing from families or friends. And so people were already teetering on the brink of financial insecurity. And as everyone knows, it is very expensive to be poor. When you don't have a cushion, when you don't have savings, and you have an unexpected medical expense, or your car breaks down and you need it to get to work, all of a sudden you're dependent on payday lenders that are going to charge you hundreds of percentage of interest, right? And they know that. And so the farther behind you get, the farther behind you're going to fall. And so closing the wealth gap, what it would mean is that people would have the cushion. People could meet an expected or an unexpected medical expense, and they wouldn't have to go to a payday lender. People could be secure in their housing. They wouldn't be at the vagaries of landlords. They could build equity in their house. They could have a choice about what their higher education is going to look like. They could have a choice in terms of what job they're going to take. And this is where a guaranteed income isn't going to be enough to close the wealth gap, but it could create a cushion. It could give workers more power to choose. You could choose, do you want to stay in your job if it's dangerous? Or you want to look for a better job? Do you want to invest in yourself and build up the skills that you need to get into a better situation, or find a job that uses your existing skills better? And again, in the context of the pandemic, people need a cushion so that they can choose to stay home if they're sick or take care of a loved one. The other thing I think we need to talk about is the role of unpaid family caregivers, that there are tens of millions of people in this country that often have to stay home from work to take care of small children or elderly or disabled or ill family members. And often 2/3 of these are women. Many of them are women of color, and they're not recognized as workers, even though for anyone who is taking care of a sick relative or young children, as you have, for example, Mayor, you know, that's hard work and that's valuable work to society. So we need to start thinking about all of this in terms of, you know, creating more wealth for people at the bottom, especially, creating a cushion through a guaranteed income. And then we can talk more about the kinds of tax policies that we could create. And I think you already started to start shifting the entrenched power at the top to give everybody more power, and working families in particular more power.
Absolutely. Are there some, just one last question on this piece, are there some specific programs that exist now, either on a state and federal level around the country, that can be expanded, made better, that could serve working families better than they actually serve them now? Absolutely.
So the number one poverty alleviating program in this country, besides Social Security, is the Earned Income Tax Credit. It's great. It's existed for 40 years, but it needs to be modernized. So Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman and Congresswoman Haaland have supported modernizing and expanding the Earned Income Tax Credit to do a couple of things. One is to make it bigger so it reaches more people. Two is to make sure that right now it's dependent on the number of kids that you have, how much of the tax credit you get. We should make sure that people who don't have kids actually get it, because right now childless low-income workers in this country are the only set of the population who actually then pay so many taxes that they go into poverty. That's outrageous and ridiculous. And so we ought to expand the Earned Income Tax Credit so childless workers get an equivalent credit. They don't get taxed into poverty. And finally, some of the more important modernizations, what I was talking about, unpaid family caregivers, that's real work. If you're an unpaid family caregiver, even though you don't receive income, you should get an Earned Income Tax Credit to help you stay afloat, right? If you leave work and you take care of young kids or a sick relative, all of a sudden your own financial situation becomes precarious. So Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman's Earned Income Tax Credit Modernization Act does that. Cost of Living Refund Act does that. That she's supporting and Congresswoman Haaland is on. So we need to look at those kinds of legislations. We need to recognize that low-income students also are ultimately going to give back to society. They should get that earned income tax credit. So these are very simple expansions of existing programs that would make a huge difference in terms of creating a cushion.
Anybody else you want to jump in there, or we can move on? Anybody can say something about that? Would be great. No. So I want to.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
So one of the things that I think we're announcing today is that Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman has introduced a guaranteed income pilot program. Yeah. And basically her legislation would set up a pilot project so that 6,000 families around the country would get monthly payments for 3 years to look at this at a national level. So similarly, Mayor, to what you and the other mayors are doing for Mayors for Guaranteed Income, Congresswoman Watson Coleman would be doing for the country to demonstrate the power of guaranteed income. And I wanted to give a shout out in particular to that bill because I think it's just about to be introduced.
Yes, that we look forward to that. We're looking forward to that all over the country. In fact, so I want to get into this Wall Street piece and the fair tax policies. I think it's incredibly important for us to lay out exactly what this means. I mean, people sometimes think you're just attacking people because they're on Wall Street. You just want to be clear that 6 of the largest banks in America have more than $10 trillion. And in fact, some of the four largest banks actually have an insanely amount of money, more money than they had before the bailout. So they were bailed out, and now they have over 70% more assets and resources than they had before the bailout, and basically are doing the same thing in terms of their relationship to working people and poor in this community. There has to in this country, there has to be something that regulates that talks about that helps us extrapolate money and resources from Wall Street to be able to distribute it to people in fair and just ways in this country. And I just want to ask Congresswoman and Vanessa Roanhorse just about the power of Wall Street and how it affects the kind of legislation that we just talked about. We talked about all this legislation. How do they affect that legislation? And why is it so difficult to get some of these things done?
Well, one thing I would say is that when you have $10 trillion, you can afford all the lobbyists in the world. You can afford to have lobbyists that are on Capitol Hill every single day fighting for the tax policies that will make those people even richer. Who pays for the lobbyists for the poor folks? Nobody. And that's why it's important that we as representatives truly represent the people of this country. And the majority of those who are just as Anna described, I was just thinking while she was talking about the earned income tax credit, that kept me and my daughter alive for years as a single mom. So it is, the power of Wall Street. I mean, when you think about the tax bill that the Republicans passed, when President Obama's economy was really doing what it was supposed to do, humming along, helping folks to regain what they had lost, working the way it should work, that Republican tax bill exploded the deficit by trillions of dollars. It gave tax cuts to the richest people in this country. And, now when working people need help in the middle of this terrible health crisis, Republicans are arguing about the price tag. Yeah. I don't understand that at all. The deficit always grows under their watch, even though they seemingly are always in denial about that. Not to mention that the legislative gift came less than a decade after Wall Street wrecked the lives of working class in the last recession, played a role in growing the racial wealth gap to the disparities that we see today. So I'm very proud to be a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, where we're working on making the tax code work for everyone, not just the billionaires. And of course, my dear friend and colleague, Representative Barbara Lee, she introduced the Inclusive Prosperity Act, which would make sure billionaires pay their fair share by imposing a tax of a fraction of a percent on the trades of stocks, bonds, and derivatives, trades that are the primary tool of the wealthy to stay wealthy, while working Americans pay higher taxes on their actively earned income. So, you know, to start off, when we make the wealthy pay their fair share of taxes, we can put the money into working people's pockets. We can use it to invest in things like the green economy that yesterday's panel talked about. We can use that money to invest in universal child care, which is something that I am very adamant about as well. We're working hard to make sure that every child has an opportunity for early childhood education. Look, if we invest in our kids in those things, we will see there's no way our economy can't get better. There's no way that people won't have more wealth. The folks who need the wealth, the poverty-stricken people, they deserve to have something. They deserve to have the American dream, not just the rich folks at the top. So look, when we properly fund our social safety net, one unexpected emergency would never bankrupt a family. So, you know, some people don't even have $400 in the bank. I was one of them. I know what that's like. I just think that the American dream is for everyone. Everybody deserves to have that, and anything we can do as members of Congress, we will absolutely do.
Ms. Roanhorse, you want to get on, say something about that? You're muted. Got to unmute.
Thank you. That's like the 2020 statement of the year. You're always muted. I just want to say thank you, Congresswoman Haaland. 100%, I think you've covered most of it. I'd just add a few things. I think to that point, the fact that we haven't actually taxed financial trade since the 1960s is huge. Is in that in itself, that small piece of legislation, I say small, but it's pretty massive. We're talking about trillions of dollars that could be reused and revitalized for this economy. And I think the fact that it's not something we were able to do after the 2008 recession, I think now it's no longer just a moral imperative. It's become a moral and economic imperative that we have to like double down on that. A few other things around, access to capital and resources. We spend so much time talking a lot about the fact that, so many regular folks are unable to access the formal financial institutions in this country, meaning banks, and their ability to get capital. And that capital could be for emergency loans because something has happened, to getting the down payment to purchase your first house, to being able to get some startup capital to start a new company or to grow your company. The fact that we are unable to have most folks be able to walk into a bank and do something within a transaction is problematic because we're still using things like credit score. Credit score was designed, and the way it's been designed and how it's calculated actually isn't really modern, and it needs to be modernized. That's another piece of opportunity that we can really look at to say, why are we using these still same measurements that actually keep people out of building wealth? So oftentimes, if you have a low credit score, you probably don't have a lot of collateral. And most Native people, as an example, if you're living on your tribal or Pueblo lands, those are trust lands. And even if you have a home, something you've built, you actually don't own that land. And that's just a simple example of how quickly we can see the wealth gap having a pinpoint in which then that trickles and spirals and ripples out. So I think it's an opportunity for us to really start to think about what is risk and why do we use these traditional 5 C's of credit to determine who gets access to resources and capital. The last thing I'll say is, and this kind of goes back to the statement I made earlier, which is most Americans don't engage in the current market. Market rate X, whatever that is, doesn't actually resonate nor have any impact on our lives because many of us aren't even operating in the market that exists on Wall Street, Most of us, if we're lucky, may have some savings. Maybe we have some retirement, but for the most part, we're not operating in the market. And it would be great to see us pushing at the Wall Street market level, looking at much better types of investment opportunities that aren't extractive, that aren't harmful, that really actually put money back into the places we live in. Oh, you're muted now.
Here we go. This concentration of wealth in the hands of a few is becoming worse and not better, and it's really affecting the economy. In my estimation, I don't think people really see very clearly how this is affecting the economy, particularly how it's affecting the middle class, not just the poor and severely poor. That is also affecting middle class Americans as well. The concentration of wealth. You want to? Can you talk about that for a minute, Anna? How do you think this concentration of wealth affects middle America as well?
Sure, absolutely. So first, the people who have the most pay the least, and that's because the way that the top 0.1% or the top 1%, but the top 0.1% actually have as much wealth as the bottom 90%. So the key way people avoid paying their fair share of taxes when they're at the top is because their income from wealth, referred to as capital gains, is taxed differently than salaries, wages, and what working people get deducted from their paychecks every 2 weeks. So right now, because they have more income from capital gains than they do from income, so most people who have incomes over $10 million, only 14% of that comes from actual wages. The rest of that is capital gains. So their top capital gains rate is 20%, and whereas working people's tax rates tops out at 37%. So right there, that's a huge inequality, and that needs to be rectified. And that gets us to the bigger question, which I think Congresswoman Haaland said, which is we're going to see a huge focus on the deficit and spending and the debt after the Republicans ran up the deficit with a tax bill that gave most of the benefits to corporations and wealthy people. And every economist on all sides of the spectrum says right now during this economic downturn, it's not the time to be frugal. It is the time to spend and invest. Because again, I think Congresswoman Haaland said, you know, the last recession took 5 years for people to come out of, except for Black people, it took 7 years for Black people to come out of. So the less we invest right now in people, the longer it is going to last. And so we have to stop pretending like there isn't enough money. There is enough money. We're the richest country in the world. But the impact of wealth concentration on working people is that wealthy people can hire the lobbyists and get the tax breaks so that they get to keep most of their money, whereas working people have to pay a greater share of it back. And so we need to flip that around. We need to expand their earned income tax credit. We need to do recurring cash payments. As the Congresswoman referred to, that one check was great, but that was months ago. And this recession and this downturn is going to last at least into next year. So we need to give people ongoing cash payments until the economy recovers. And we need to start taxing capital gains and wealth. There's a lot of different proposals in Congress to do that so that we can start taking some of this money and investing it into the working people.
I think you made some salient points, particularly, I don't think many people know the difference between how income is taxed versus how capital gains are taxed, and I think that provided some serious clarity for a lot of people. But the irony of it is the solution. You're saying how to fix it is all of these policies that we need to pass, and the top 1% actually invest a lot of their income and money in making sure these laws don't get passed, and making sure that they are lobbying, as you said, Congress and other folks to make sure that the status quo remains. And so that brings us all the way back to the Congresswoman about what can we do as regular working class Americans, as people in this community who are trying to fight for these policies. What exactly, if there's any kind of prescription that we need to follow in order to get these things done?
Well, first of all, you can vote. You can vote, right? You can get out and vote. in the largest numbers ever. This is an important election, and it's early voting's a month away. The general election is only 2 months away. We need everyone to vote, and vote for the people who truly represent you, who represent your values, who care whether Black people can own a home, who care whether single moms can, access a Section 184 loan, or not be pushed out of, qualifying for food stamps by, $1 or $2 or something like that. We need people in office who care about these issues. This coronavirus has shed an incredible light on so many of the disparities that our country is suffering right now. We see that in the data. We see that in some of the data. In some of the data, they just group all the people of color together and call us other. But in some of the data, we see that African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, they have the highest rate of COVID. Why? Because they live in the most polluted areas. They don't have access to health care. They don't have the things that a lot of other communities have. We need true representation in this country. And it's time for folks to step up. If you don't see somebody representing your values, then run for office yourself. But voting is one way for us to make sure that we have people at the table who are going to care about the issues that are plaguing our communities. And these fundamental things: running water, broadband internet service, food, for heaven's sake. These are all things that everybody deserves to have in our country. No teacher should not be buying school supplies. We need to fund our schools so that everybody has an opportunity at success. So to people who are out there saying, what should we do? Pardon me, I am quarantining with 4 dogs. Vote for the folks who represent your values. And by the way, answer the census. That's absolutely something that we need to do. And everyday people can do that. I got into politics because I felt that Native Americans deserved to have people who cared about them. And so I worked for candidates who supported Native American issues. As it turns out now, I'm in Congress and I support Native American issues. So it's possible that we have true representation in this country. We just need to keep working toward that.
Excellent. That was incredible. This data that I've gotten recently has really been disheartening. Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, and Bill Gates likely are worth more than the whole bottom half of society, which is 160. They're worth more than 165 million people. I don't know how that gets to happen. Obviously, Western democracy hasn't figured out how to equalize, the wealth in this country. And then 400 richest individuals collectively own $2.9 trillion. That's obscene, even that this happens, and the difficulty for us to pass these bills. I think, is there a place that people can go and a website, anything, to find out all of the bills that they need to support to help remedy some of these things that we're talking about? Because we talked about a lot of things, and people need to be able to go somewhere where they can just put their hands on it and say, I want to read it, and say, I want to support that, support this, support that.
Right.
Wall Street guys go do their trading. We want to be able to go look at policy and do the same thing.
Absolutely. Well, of course, there's so many great organizations who can help, who are championing these issues, right? Who are taking up these issues, and they have campaigns to make sure they pass. If every, to find out the exact bills, you can go to house.gov, and I think there's a place where you can just search for legislation. You can do it by keyword or by number. Usually if you have the number, that helps a little bit. It's a little bit easier to find exactly what you're looking for. But there are, when I got sworn in to Congress on January 3rd, 2019, I got sworn in with an incredible, diverse Congress, the most diverse Congress we've ever had. My freshman colleagues today are true champions for working families. And so a number of us are, you can go to, if you have a particular Congress person, mine is haaland.house.gov. And that's how the websites go for members of Congress, their last name and then .house.gov. And you can find, usually there are lists of legislation that each representative has introduced. But I'm proud to stand with so many of my colleagues in this Congress and fight for working families every single day.
That's awesome. And go ahead, Anna.
I was going to chime in. The Congress.gov has all the congressional bills, so you can look for House and Senate. And then our own organization, economicsecurityproject.org, we have lists of legislation that deals with creating a guaranteed income, doing recurring cash payments in time of a pandemic, and also doing a cost of living refund, expanding the earned income tax credit. So that can be a resource for people too.
Can I add one?
Sure, please.
Awesome. So we do a lot of work specifically supporting small business micro enterprise, and some of the bills that are being recommended to ensure future PPP and EIDL funds are actually going to reach minority, tribal, and women entrepreneurs. I would check out Page 30 Coalition. There's a number of recommendations, suggestions to new legislation and policies, so that we can ensure that our small entrepreneurs and microeconomies can continue to be stabilized and be supported during this time.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to something that was said about the recession, that it took 5 years to get out of the recession and 7 years for African Americans to get out of the recession. I really like some you guys to elaborate on that, because I'm not sure everybody is clear on what exactly that means or how that is even possible. It seems to me when a recession is over, it's over, and that everybody is okay. And so what that insinuates is that in fact is not the case. So,
right. If you don't have a cushion, you're going to fall harder. Right. That's the problem. And so people who are most able to weather the storms are the people who, as Vanessa will point out, have access to banks and loans, and people who have a cushion of wealth or who have a house that's paid off, and people who don't get further and further behind. The unemployment rate didn't come back up as quickly as people wanted it to. So, and one of the problems was that once President Obama took office and they passed one big recovery bill, after that, it was shut down. The Republicans didn't really want to, all of a sudden there was newfound concern over the debt, and the Republicans didn't want to do anything else to really help people and inject more money into the economy. And so the people who are least able to bounce back didn't bounce. And that's a huge problem. And that's going to be, I worry it's going to be even worse right now, because it's not just an economic downturn, it's a health crisis. So people are seeing, disparate impacts on communities of color, on Black people and Indigenous people when it comes to the impacts of COVID. And there's long-term health impacts that people are now looking at. And again, we're just not doing enough. We're not investing enough in the economy, in the people who are struggling to be able to weather the storm.
And I would add, the population that's also going to be the most impacted, particularly around career growth and career opportunities, are going to be our women. Our women are oftentimes the frontline workers. We talked about those who are caretakers that are not considered part of the economic system, yet really are the bedrock of all of our abilities to go to work and have the ability to make money and have commerce in our lives. And we're already seeing that women specifically are going to be the most impacted in job loss and finding jobs post this time, as we see the health impacts of COVID. Our elder and childcare is going to increase, and it is increasing. And so I think when we think about a recession ending and why it takes so long, it's because we're not factoring in all the other parts of work that happens. And oftentimes that work is in care, is in just care of a family, care of a place, care of a community. And those tend to be held by women.
And do you think investment in these communities have something to do with the lag in their recovery? Like, you know, the investment in specific communities itself, does it have a direct effect on the ability to recover? Anybody can jump on that.
Yes, it does, because the more you can keep up, the less behind you're going to get. If you're going to increase your debt, or even let's think about housing, right? What's going to happen when these eviction moratoriums expire? If people didn't have the money this month to pay for it, and Congress isn't going to give them recurring direct cash payments because the Republicans are blocking it, how are people going to come up to pay with that money? So that is a direct correlation. If the farther behind and the more in debt you get, the longer it's going to take you to get out. So the more money you put in, the less time it's going to take you to recover.
Right.
Exactly.
And I can absolutely attest to that.
Right. You wanted to say something, Vanessa?
Yeah, this is Vanessa. You know, when we talk about investments, there's so many different types of investments. Obviously, capital is probably some of the most important resource, but also really thinking about like what communities and places get the most investments. And so oftentimes that is anywhere from sort of the straight commerce of capital, social capital, but also community capital that gets put in. And oftentimes, most of our communities that are the vulnerable places that have been impacted because we haven't had resources are the ones that will be forgotten. And or what we'll see is those with resources will start to change these communities again by being able to leverage their wealth to purchase properties, to like move capital to places that weren't normally moving. And so I think a lot about how we structure these investments and how we need to be very thoughtful, cautious, and creative in terms of should we be putting our money in. And obviously we need to be putting our money into the people. We need to allow people to make those decisions for themselves on how they spend their money. But we also need to be moving money to financial intermediaries and institutions that are place-based and values and missions driven, like our CDFIs, like our credit unions, because those are the ones who are going to be there for a long time. They've been there now, they will be there later. And that's the kind of institutional investment I see as an opportunity coming alongside a lot of these additional policies.
And more working people deal with those kind of institutions anyway. That's for sure. I like something you said earlier. You said that, and I'm paraphrasing it, that doing good is also helping us do well, right? So it's not just the moral imperative, it's also for economic security and well-being at the same time. So it's almost counterintuitive at this point that these folks do not want to give people these dollars, do not want to give people a guaranteed income or money to pay their rent and all these other things. Do you believe clearly that there's data that shows giving folks this money helps the economy to recover?
Yes, absolutely. So a couple of things. One is when they looked at the actual impact of the one-time economic impact payments from the CARES Act, it turns out the folks at the upper end of the income level mostly saved the money. People at the bottom end of the income scale spent their money within weeks. Wow. Other research looking at earned income tax credit shows that for every $1 people get in earned income tax credits, local communities get $1.50 to $2 of local economic benefit. And the bottom line here, and one of the most important things we can learn from past recessions is if you give people at the lower end of the income scale money, they will spend it, and that creates an economic stimulus. So when the economy is ready to reopen, you want people who are going to go out and spend money in their communities right away, and that's people who need the money right now and will go out and spend it. They won't be, I don't know, investing it in stock market or whatever people at the top end are doing with it. So the best economic stimulus is to give money to people who will go out and spend it right away. And again, earned income tax credit is $1.50 to $2 per dollar spent. And even in the last checks that went out, they showed people at the lower end of the income scale spent the money within weeks.
Wow. So you mean that the trickle down don't work?
There's no such thing as trickle down. It's not trickling. Jeff Bezos isn't trickling anything, is he?
That's right. Congresswoman, you want to add on to anything? I want to allow Councilwoman Coleman to ask you questions, but I want you to talk a little bit.
Sure. You know, I was just thinking about how much work people do, predominantly women do, that they don't get paid for. You know what I'm saying? Like elderly parents who need care, that generally falls to the women of the family. Raising small children, that generally falls to the women of the family. And there's a lot of, women do so much of the work that is unpaid in this country. And no, we don't, we want to have children, we want to raise them, but I'm just saying, that's why all of these programs that we're talking about, early childhood education, child care, all of these things that we should be supporting are absolutely imperative to help with everything that we're talking about today. So I just I can't stress enough that the investments that we make into our communities, it just pays dividends. I know there's always pushback to that, but we're going to keep fighting for those things every chance we absolutely get.
Before I go to the Congresswoman, just I have to say something about this pandemic. We're in a few pandemics, but I'm talking about the scientific pandemic, the COVID-19, and how it has affected the economy. Period, and in my mind exacerbated the kind of wealth gap and income gap and all of these things. It makes it incredibly imperative that we do all the things that you guys have laid out, that we do it in a more expeditious way, and try to figure out how to make these things happen in these communities. So if there is, and I'm afraid that if there's a second wave as a mayor, that we'll be in very, very desperate kind of times that we're in, and so removing the president of the United States is just not enough. He needs to be removed, in my mind. I know all of you ladies agree with that, but he needs to be removed and replaced. But what are some specific other things that need to happen immediately in your mind?
So, sorry, I was like, which Congresswoman? So I mentioned earlier the census. That is something that's absolutely important. I want everyone to take that to heart. This census data is real, and it's going to help us to make sure that we can fund or send the funding where it's needed for schools, for hospitals, for infrastructure. That is happening this year, and it's so important that it bears repeating every opportunity I have. Look, we can pass all the legislation, and we have passed a large number of bills in the House. We've passed a lot of bills in the House to help this situation as we see, and it's stagnated in the Senate, and that's extremely unfortunate. So as I mentioned earlier, this election is absolutely important, and we are going to keep working that as hard as we can.
Yep. Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman is joining us. I see her. So,
hey, Mayor, I'm telling you, this has been a fantastic discussion. No stone has been left unturned here. One of the things that we got to do is when we change the presidency, we got to change the Senate as well. Yeah. Because I think that we've demonstrated in the House of Representatives because of the diversity of the House and because the leadership respects the diversity of issues and needs, we've already established that we're willing to push some important legislation that lifts up those who are least among us. And every time we try to do any of these things, Mitch McConnell stands in the way. And even when we tried to hold the president's corruptibilities accountable, McConnell, as an individual, stood in the way, and then the Senate and its sort of impotence stood in the way. So people need to understand that our lives, our survival, everything is on the table right now. This is no more consequential election than we're going to have in all of the years that I've been able to vote. I was really happy that we finally talked about the fact that if you give us a bottom line under which we will never fall, and we will be able to support our families and to pay our bills and to have decent housing and feed our families, we're going to also spend money. So we will generate a healthier economy. We're not stingy, and we need things. Rich people put their money in other places. I don't know what they're saving it for, but they put it in places and watch it grow, and they think that that's the purpose in having it. You put money in the hands of people that earn a decent salary, that have decent benefits. You put money in the hands of individuals, either through a guaranteed income program or whatever. They will use that money to provide the needs for themselves and their families. And in so doing, they will support businesses. And those businesses will create employment opportunities. And those employment opportunities will result in additional growth in the economy. I keep saying that right now we're at this moral moment, but it's beyond a moment, Mayor. It is a movement, I believe, that people like Deb Haaland and other members of our caucus who are so progressive in their thinking, who look to see what is it that's been underrepresented for African American communities, Latinx community, Native American communities, you name it, disability communities. We're willing to stand up for those communities, and we're willing to fight for the opportunity to provide them with resources without having to jump through all of the bureaucratic hurdles that typically exist when a program is designed to address everyday working people's needs. We can just look at some of the incredible obstacles that were created in the CARES packages, not by the legislation, but by the administration in the implementation of the legislation. It's all designed to continue this sort of dependence as opposed to enforcing, ensuring, and working towards self-sufficiency. We need to be working towards self-sufficiency now. So we need to do things that lay a fundamental bottom line: a guaranteed income, a guaranteed job, a baby bonds, extension of the EITC, an infrastructure program that's going to fix all of our crumbling infrastructure on so many levels, and at the same time, bring jobs, good paying jobs. We got to make sure that we're enforcing the laws that pay women equal pay for the work that we do. We need to make sure that we value the work that women typically do and women of color typically do, because they're the lowest paid jobs on the economic spectrum. To me, this is an opportunity right now, and I know Deb is on board. We're going to put everything we can on the table and see how far we can push it. And we're going to push it with the understanding that there's going to be a floor, unlike there's ever been a floor before. So yesterday's discussion on jobs was a very important part of this discussion. Today's discussion on wealth is a very important component of the discussion. And the discussion we will have tomorrow is the significance of housing in all this. Housing that is affordable, accessible, isn't just available in places where there's a concentration of poverty and a demand on services and underserviced, but housing next to transportation, housing next to jobs, and housing that is available and accessible. And irrespective of what this president is saying about protecting the suburbs, that is code language for straight up racism. And we must make sure that we are communicating that to people who are going to make a choice in November as to what they want this country to look like in the future. And so I'm not going to take any more of the time. I'm just telling you that this has been an exciting, interesting, and important discussion. There's a lot for us to go back and digest to see what we translate into legislation and what we pass on to Joe Biden for his administration to effectuate with the use of his sort of executive authorities that the president right now is reminding us so much of. So I'm just glad to be here, and it's been a gas listening to you all, and thank you so much for doing what you did. And Mayor, thank you for taking your time, and Deb for hosting.
Yep.
And make sure everybody like shows up tomorrow with Representative Ilhan Omar because we're going to be talking about housing. Excellent. It all fits together.
So I want to thank all the panelists. They were incredible panel and huge amount of information to digest. To give everybody a last opportunity to say something before we close this out and turn it back over to our host, Congresswoman Haaland. Just want to give you an opportunity to say something before we close out, ladies.
Oh,
go ahead, Anna. Yep.
Okay. Well, I wanted to say thank you very much. This is an incredibly important opportunity. And I think we have an incredible opportunity as a country to move forward and rebuild better, right? We can take all the lessons that we've learned and hopefully build on the excitement and get people turning out to vote, and also start passing some of this important legislation that we talked about on this call and create an economy that works for everybody instead of one where the top 0.1% have more money than the bottom 90%. And as Congresswoman Watson Coleman said, we need an economy where people have a roof over their heads, they have food to eat, they can keep their families healthy, and that creates a more thriving economy. That's good for everybody. So it's not just morally the right thing to do, but it's actually economically the right thing to do. If we passed all the legislation that we talked about on this call, we'd be able to achieve that.
That's right.
I can go and let the Congresswoman end today's call, but I just want to say thank you for an opportunity to share some of the work that we are most excited about, as well as recognizing that, you know, if we're going to seriously address the wealth gap, we have to understand that first, it's about recognizing the racial wealth gap, because it is about those who have been absolutely excluded from financial opportunity. And recognizing that the wealth gap, while all Americans are experiencing it, when we invest and put money into those who have actively been pushed out and are those that have been most harmed, and we recognize the history of how this country was built, then we can truly start to heal and move forward, in my mind, but also really starting to build that deeper financial wealth for our community. And I think that's imperative as we continue to go forward, is recognizing that there are many types of gaps of wealth, and how we start to focus is to name it, and that is the racial wealth equity gap. And with that, I just want to say this has been a true honor and privilege, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Excellent. Congresswoman, there you go.
Thank you so much this afternoon, and thank you.
I think you have difficulty with the sound there.
All right. These juice. now?
Still having a little difficulty. It's kind of delayed.
And garbled.
Does it?
No, I think it's still a little having a little issue.
How about?
No, we can hear you. It's just interference.
It's garbled.
Sound of hello. Hello.
Still the same.
Hey, Mayor.
All right. Yep.
The Guaranteed Jobs Program is just something I wanted to just note one thing. It would be supported not by taxpayers' dollars. It would be supported by a transaction tax on Wall Street that would raise approximately $770 billion over a period of 10 years. So it's a win-win for taxpayers, and it certainly is a win-win for those who need a job. I hope Deb Haaland can get on because she's just been so amazing.
How is this? Can you hear me now?
Excellent.
Hello?
There
Okay,
you
I'm
go.
sorry. I'm sorry. It was always an issue with technology, and I'm not the best at it. So thank you for your patience. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you. I love having you as a colleague. I'm so proud to serve with you. Vanessa, as always, we appreciate everything that you do for all of our communities. Thank you for speaking of this in terms of healing. We absolutely need to do some healing. And Anna, everything you're doing helps us so incredibly much. We need allies like you in Congress to make sure that we're doing what we need to do and getting done what we need to get done. So I'm really happy for everyone who joined us from home this afternoon. Every single year, the federal government allocates hundreds of billions of dollars using census data. Please make sure to fill out your census so your community gets the funding it needs for schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. This is so important. This is how you can do your part to fight the wealth gap, to make sure your community gets counted. So I'm going to repeat what Bonnie said. Tomorrow is, this is day 2 of 3 of the virtual conference. Tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, we'll hear a discussion with my colleague, Representative Ilhan Omar, Homes Guarantee organizer Tara Raghuvir, and experts on the future of housing. So make sure you can watch this tomorrow again. And thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor to be your host today.
Thank you. Thank everybody for listening, and everybody should tune in tomorrow. Appreciate it. Excellent discussion. God bless.